Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Just 5 days to go until the US presidential election, and both candidates are heading west. Harris to Las Vegas for a rally alongside Jennifer Lopez. Trump is heading to Arizona for an interview with Tucker Carlson. Catastrophic flooding in Spain has claimed the lives of at least 158 people. The country's prime minister is urging people to stay home during the rescue efforts. And the Lebanese caretaker prime minister Najib Mikati says Israel and Hezbollah could be set to agree on a ceasefire within the coming days. Hello and welcome. We're just 5 days away from the day when Americans will head to the polls in one of the tightest presidential elections in recent memory. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris remain neck and neck in the polls, and both candidates are heading west today. Harris is holding a rally in Las Vegas, where Jennifer Lopez is due to make an appearance. Donald Trump is heading to Glendale, Arizona for a live podcast-style interview with the former Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Well, Michigan is a key swing state, narrowly voted for Joe Biden by around 150,000 votes in the 2020 election. But growing dissatisfaction with his administration's Gaza policy amongst the state's 210,000 Arab Americans is prompting Democrats to engage more with this vital community. Will Kamala Harris address their concerns? Well, for more, I'm joined by our chief correspondent in Dacey, Simon Marks. Simon, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just tell us what we can expect from both campaign teams today.
Well, they're literally Donald Trump and Kamala Harris following in each other's footsteps today, Tom, which gives you a sense again, and we've said this every day over the last few days, that this election is going to be won or lost in those 7 critical battleground states that these two candidates continue to barnstorm. So today, for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, it is all about Arizona, it is all about Nevada, and it is all about star power. As you said, Jennifer Lopez is going to be campaigning with Kamala Harris today. Tomorrow, Cardi B has announced that she will be campaigning with Kamala Harris. And Donald Trump will be sitting down with Tucker Carlson, one of the stars of the Make America Great Again movement. The former Fox News host will interview Donald Trump. It's clearly going to be a very, very sympathetic interview because Tucker Carlson has been a permanent fixture on Donald Trump's campaign over the course of the last several weeks and has made several speeches at various Trump rallies, including the one that was held at Madison Square Garden on Sunday in New York, in support of the former president. There is even a suggestion among some observers here that Tucker Carlson might be a possible future White House press secretary in the event that Donald Trump secures the presidency. This, of course, is all about getting the vote out by both candidates, trying to galvanize supporters. And in that regard, Democrats say today that they like some of the numbers that they're seeing from early voting that is taking place in many of these battleground states, where so far more of the early voters have been women and there have been fewer men so far participating in early voting. And Kamala Harris believes that there is a gender gap here, that women are more likely to support her than Donald Trump, and that men are more likely to support Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. So they're extrapolating from all of that a sense that they are currently in the lead. But you've got to be very, very careful with all of these early voting figures because they really don't tell us very much beyond the numbers of people that have voted and what kind of voters they are, registered Democrats, registered Republicans, or independents. But the barnstorming of the battleground states set to continue today in Arizona and Nevada.
OK, and we've heard from Bill Clinton, who's been adding his voice specifically on the issue of the conflict in Gaza. I'm just wondering how that went down.
Yeah, well, it went down with controversy, as you might expect. Bill Clinton campaigning in Michigan yesterday, joining a growing number of leading Democrats who are saying to supporters in Michigan, you might have a problem with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's handling of the situation in Gaza, but don't let that result in you sitting this election out or deciding that you should vote for another candidate. Bill Clinton made his argument based on his version of history in the Middle East that was then immediately rejected on social media by some activists in Michigan who insisted that he had misstated the reality of history in the Middle East, and who insisted on social media that they were going to double down and withhold their support from Kamala Harris. There is a movement in Michigan called Abandon Harris 2024 that is encouraging people not to vote for Donald Trump, but to vote for a third-party candidate, Jill Stein of the Green Party. And the Democrats are so worried about the number of grassroots supporters there that might ignore the advice of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama within the last 24 hours, Senator Bernie Sanders, and may still choose not to back Kamala Harris, that they've actually now created an advertisement that is airing on television and being targeted digitally at Michigan voters in a bid to try to persuade them, as the ad puts it, that a vote for Jill Stein is a vote for Donald Trump. So it's a worry for Kamala Harris, and it's going to be a worry for her all the way through until election night, when the actual results start coming in from Michigan.
And Simon, all the while, I think we can call it garbage gate, can't we? It's rumbling on, and it seems that Donald Trump and his team have managed to spin this one rather firmly to their advantage, haven't they?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, we're not going to know until we see some actual votes being actually counted. Let's just spin back to last Sunday, when garbage became the word of the week in this American presidential election campaign, resulting from a comedian making a racist joke during the warm-up act ahead of Donald Trump's appearance at Madison Square Garden, saying that there was a floating island of garbage in the ocean and it was called Puerto Rico. That caused uproar among the Latino and Hispanic community, particularly among Puerto Ricans. Seemed to be a potential problem for Donald Trump, still does, in states like Pennsylvania, where there are 500,000 Puerto Ricans who are voters. Joe Biden then delivered Donald Trump a gift by saying that the only floating garbage that he could see out there were Trump's supporters. And in the last 24 hours, Donald Trump has absolutely taken this on the front foot. He clambered aboard a garbage truck yesterday, drove around in circles for a while and answered reporters' questions, clad in a high-vis jacket of the type that refuse workers in the United States commonly wear. He made a series of comments in rally speeches insisting that it's disgraceful for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to dismiss his supporters as garbage, and said that it lifted the lid on the way in which they actually feel about half the American population. So he's continuing to try and deflect attention away from the beginning of all of this, which was that crude joke made in New York on Sunday, and putting it back on Kamala Harris. She has distanced herself from Joe Biden's comments, but whether garbage continues to be the word of the week all the way through until Friday night here, I think is unclear, but certainly in the climax of a very unedifying presidential election campaign here, it is notable that garbage is the watchword on the lips of both candidates.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for that update. From DC, our chief correspondent, Simon Marks. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the US election's obsession with the word garbage is continuing, with Donald Trump using it at every opportunity to score political points in the final race to the White House. Well, it's still unclear if President Joe Biden meant to call all Republican voters garbage during a Tuesday night call with supporters. But Trump has capitalized on the comments as his rival Kamala Harris tries to turn the page and focus on election issues like the economy. Our very own Nick Harper filed this report from Washington.
Donald Trump wants a new job, just not necessarily this one. On Wednesday in Wisconsin, he dressed up as a garbage man.
How do you like my garbage truck?
For an impromptu press conference from the cab of a truck to attack Joe Biden's Tuesday night comments, where he appeared to call Trump voters garbage.
Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself if he knows what he's even doing.
The orange vest stayed on for his rally in Wisconsin, where he switched the attacks to his rival in the race, Kamala Harris.
For the past 9 years, Kamala and her party have called us racists, bigots, fascists, deplorables, irredeemables, Nazis, and they called me Hitler.
He blasted the vice president on immigration, the economy, and for running a campaign of hate, despite plenty of disparaging, divisive remarks of his own. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, Harris hit 3 cities in 3 swing states, lashing out at Trump in Pennsylvania.
This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
Before encouraging voters in Wisconsin to back her vision for the future.
I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to the challenges you face. I am not looking to score political points. I am looking to make progress.
Meanwhile, tech billionaire and Trump supporter Elon Musk faces a court hearing for his $1 million daily giveaway. Pennsylvania's district attorney has sued Musk for interference with the integrity of elections, accusing him of paying people to vote for the former president. Another day of battleground campaigning today, with both Trump and Harris travelling to Nevada and Arizona. And they're laying out plans for their final rallies ahead of Tuesday's election day. Trump's campaign is leaning towards Michigan for his Monday night event, while Harris is expected to choose Pennsylvania, revealing their hands for which state they feel may win or lose them this election. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take a quick look now at the polls. Kamala Harris holds a narrow lead in Michigan and Wisconsin, and while she and Trump both seem to be tied in Pennsylvania. Well, nationally, a recent YouGov survey shows Harris with 47%. That compares to Donald Trump with 46%. Well, for more on this, so we can cross to Washington and speak to Amy Dacey, who is the former CEO of the Democratic National Committee. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Amy. Just looking at the polls there, I mean, incredibly tight. I mean, far too close to call, isn't it, for the time being?
Yes, I mean, the polls have it as very tight. I don't think that's been unexpected. It's been that way for quite some time. But just a reminder, these polls are a snapshot in time. We've already had close to 50 million people vote in this election already. And so each campaign is trying to have their final message in the final days. The only poll that matters is the one when the votes are counted on November 5th, for sure.
For sure. Now let's talk about what the candidates are up to. Kamala Harris is in Las Vegas today. Along with her is going to be Jennifer Lopez, who is of course Puerto Rican origin. That in itself is a message, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think that definitely both campaigns are trying to utilize surrogates to try and reach communities that they want to certainly connect with, ask for their vote, get them to motivate and vote on election day. I think recent statements have just kind of shown that some of the surrogates in these communities really matter, and definitely Kamala Harris as the candidate wants to have people around her. But again, they help with enthusiasm, they help to show support, but it's really the candidates asking directly to these voters for their vote that will matter.
Of course, we've heard plenty of people using this word garbage in recent days. It seems it won't go away. A bit of an own goal by President Joe Biden, would you say?
Well, listen, I think the bottom line is you see, Donald Trump latching on to the theatrics around a statement that, certainly President Biden's tried to clarify. Vice President Harris made it very clear her position on that. And yet you still haven't heard former President Trump denounce any of the comments that were made at his Madison Square Garden, rally. So he's into theatrics. He's not into substance. I think it would be better for him to be out talking about his policies. I think a lot of his strategists feel the same way, but he'd rather be driving around in a garbage truck and trying to distract from the real issues that people care about. Nevertheless,
as we just saw in that poll, roughly half of the US electorate still intends to vote for him, or roughly half, I said. So, what is it about Donald Trump? Why the enduring appeal? Do you think it's his persona, or do you think there's a perceived failure on the part of the Democrats to deliver on issues that are important to people?
Well, I still think we're in a very polarized, country. I think that what we have found always in studies is that party affiliation is the most, strongest identifier as why people vote in a certain way. I think there's definitely some people who, feel strongly that, they want to support the president. I think, he's out there, with a lot of misinformation, unfortunately, to talk to these voters. But because you see that polarization not only in the presidential race, but this is why our Senate and our House is so close, why you see state chambers, legislative chambers across the country with very narrow margins. It's very polarized around both parties. And so I think that is really a clear indicator in some of these polls as well, how we're breaking down with parties and why these independent swing voters, undecided voters matter so much in these elections.
One of the things we heard from Donald Trump in the last 24 hours is he said he was going to protect women, quote, whether they like it or not. What do you read into that?
Well, I certainly don't think as a woman, I find that very reassuring. I think he knows that he has a problem in the gender gap with women voters. I think that, he's misrepresenting, his policies when it comes to women. I mean, this is the same man who definitely celebrated and acknowledged that he was the key component for breaking down Roe v. Wade and having that overturned. So he can say he's for women. He can even say it in ways that might not resonate well with women. But I do think you will see women voters listening to what is in their best interest, where it comes with, whether it's abortion rights, whether it's the economy, whether it's safety and security. And so, he can say this rhetoric to women voters, but I don't know if it'll matter to them at the polls. Now, no group is a monolith. There are certainly, some women that will be supporting him, but I think statements like that don't help him with those undecided women in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan.
You mentioned the economy there, usually the top concern amongst voters. And when you look at all the indicators, they're pretty good looking from the outside in. You've got unemployment just around the 4% mark, inflation's been brought down, and yet people still feel aggrieved, particularly about the cost of living. What's Kamala Harris doing and saying to address people's concerns on that particular issue?
Well, I think, first of all, she's acknowledging that there's some anxiety in the electorate. I think she's acknowledging that not everything was accomplished during, Biden's first administration, and there are things to do. That's why she wants to look forward with her policies. She's been very specific where you haven't seen that come out of the Trump-Vance ticket. We're talking about housing costs and trying to make sure that housing is more affordable. Recently talking about using Medicare as an opportunity to help people who need to take care of their aging and elderly parents. They're talking about, things about living wages. They're talking about things that will really, paid medical leave. They're talking about childcare. These are issues that will affect those checkbook issues, those, sitting around the dining room table, making decisions. College affordability, of course, has always been big. So these are really specific policy areas that I think this Harris-Walz ticket says they want to make a difference. Really doesn't resonate, with the rhetoric that's happening, out of the Trump-Vance ticket, where there's really not a vision. Even when pushed on his policy issues, I think you hear that ticket say they haven't formulated a plan, they're getting there. That's not really reassuring to people who want to know what are the things you can do to me to make, do for me to make my life better going forward.
But nevertheless, a poll I looked at in the New York Times points to the fact that 52% of voters trust Donald Trump on the economy. That compares to 45% for Harris. So what is it about Donald Trump and how he's playing his cards that he's perceived as being more trustworthy on this extremely important issue?
Well, I think he's saying less and certainly meaning, less as well. I think that, just saying that you're going to make, things were better under me, I think he's looking back. Things did cost differently. We also have to remember that this is somebody who was president of the United States for 4 years, and things were not great under that administration. He suffered, terribly during a global pandemic where his policies and, his leadership failed us. There were certainly economic indicators during those 4 years that were not beneficial to people. So I think that this just saying, you're ready to make America better or feel better, there's 4 years that show that he's not capable of doing that. So I think the campaign, the Democratic campaign's out there trying to make sure people understand the difference and what 4 more years of Trump would look like. But you have to remind people of what it actually was like under a Trump presidency.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time. We, of course, speak to you at some stage very soon. Thank you very much indeed, Amy Dacey. We are keeping a close eye on developments in the United States.
Hi.
We will, of course, be bringing you the latest from the US elections. We're also keeping a very close eye on opinion polls, where it appears the two candidates are neck and neck in the polls. A very tight race. Let's get a brief check of some other news stories we're following for you now. The Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia has reiterated that the kingdom will not normalize ties with Israel without a Palestinian state. That comment was made by Prince Faisal bin Farhan at the Future Investment Initiative, where he slammed Israel for devaluating Palestinian lives. Well, an estimated 43,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza during the course of these past 12 months. North Korea has conducted its longest ICBM test yet, using what it's calling the world's most powerful strategic weapon. Well, the Hermit Kingdom's leader, Kim Jong-un, said the test was a warning to enemies that have been threatening the country's security. Well, the US and South Korea held high-level talks as a result of that move. Well, the Kremlin is declining to comment on whether or not Russia is helping North Korea develop its military technology. Russia, meanwhile, says it is set to sign a treaty with Iran. Moscow's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, says that the treaty would strengthen ties between the two countries and include closer cooperation in the field of defense. Russia says it expects Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, to visit Moscow before the end of next year. Some sports stories we're following for you now. The São Paulo Grand Prix on Sunday is going to be the 41st World Championship Grand Prix at Interlagos. Well, Brazil first hosted this race at Interlagos in 1973. Well, the Formula One leader Max Verstappen will take a grid penalty at São Paulo Grand Prix after bringing in another new engine. Well, the three-time defending F1 world champion will introduce a sixth internal combustion engine this year. Well, only 4 are permitted before penalties are incurred. Some golf news for you now. Richard T. Lee has set the early pace at the Asian Tour's Indonesian Masters today, firing a 10 under par 62 to surge into the lead after the first round. Well, the Canadian rattled off 2 eagles and 7 birdies to go clear at the top of the leaderboard. Well, Lee finished in the top 10 in the past 3 Asia Tour events, and earlier this year secured a 3rd place at the GS Caltex Mekyong Open. To basketball news now. The Cavs gave the Los Angeles Lakers a rough ride despite a warm reception for Bronny James in Cleveland, where the hosts dominated in a 134-110 victory to improve to 5-0. Well, the game was billed as a homecoming for LeBron and Bronny James. That made them the first father-son duo to play alongside each other in an NBA game. 20-year-old Bronny was drafted by the Lakers in June and is expected to be headed to the developmental G League very soon. Rugby news now. England head coach Steve Borthwick has issued a rallying cry to his players ahead of the start of the Autumn Nations Series campaign. England will play against New Zealand at the Allianz Stadium in Twickenham on Saturday. England also face Australia, South Africa and Japan. Well, 2 of Borthwick's team members were defeated against the All Blacks on their summer tour of New Zealand, which followed the World Cup semi-finals last year. Turning now to events in the Middle East. The Hezbollah-Israel conflict may soon come to an end. The US envoy Amos Hochstein indicated to the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati that a ceasefire in the war could be possible before the US elections on the 5th of November. Well, the Prime Minister of Lebanon condemned Israeli threats that lead to civilian evacuation and displacement as a war crime, calling on international entities to pressure Israel. Well, despite this, he expressed hope for a ceasefire deal as Israel's public broadcaster reported a draft agreement for an initial 60-day truce. Well, for more on all the latest developments around the ceasefire proposals, I can speak to the Economist's Middle East correspondent Gareth Browne, who joins us from Beirut. Gareth, great to have you with us. We've heard the Lebanese Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, expressing optimism about this ceasefire, possibly in the coming hours or days. Where do you think this sense of optimism comes from?
Well, that's the question that everyone has on their mind here in Beirut. I think it's it's not quite clear. Obviously, we've had some high-level US visitors to Beirut in the last day or two. And there's definitely a spring in Prime Minister Mikati's step, talking about a possible ceasefire within hours. But I have to be honest, I think the excitement, around a possible deal has really been extinguished in the last few hours. Amos Hochstein, who's, a key figure in the US negotiation between Hezbollah and Israel, was slated to come back to Beirut in the next day or two. And I understand that's now been cancelled and he'll head back to Washington. And, once news of this possible ceasefire broke in the Lebanese media, there was quite a fierce backlash, not just from Hezbollah and Hezbollah-affiliated media, but, from across the political spectrum. I think there are parts of this draft deal which was leaked to Israeli media, in the last few days, which I think many Lebanese, not just Hezbollah, would find unacceptable. And to a degree, the deal that we've seen would give Israel essentially, the ability to strike when and where it wanted to inside Lebanon. And I think, if you read the media here, which the parts of the media which are traditionally supportive or representative of Hezbollah, there's some very, very unpalatable things in there. So we have to wait and see. Is there going to be another visit by a US envoy to Beirut? But it seems at the moment like Prime Minister Mikati might have got a bit too excited and spoken too soon.
In terms of what we've been hearing from Hezbollah, of course, they've got that long-standing condition that a ceasefire is conditional upon a ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, do you think there's any chance they're going to drop that condition?
Seems unlikely. It would be quite a U-turn. This was something that, Hezbollah had said, but even Nasrallah himself had said repeatedly in speeches throughout the past year. And, in the last speech before he was killed, it was something he reiterated. It would be very difficult for Naim Qassem, who, was recently announced as the new leader of Hezbollah, to make an absolute U-turn. However, there might be room for a sort of fudge, if you like, a downgrading of the war in Gaza, which the Israelis could interpret as the war in Gaza not being over, but would be a significant enough reduction in hostilities, is something that could possibly be spun by Hezbollah as something akin to a ceasefire. I think there's a lot of optimism, shall we say, hope, not only in Israel, but also in America, that this can be broken. Hezbollah is in a far weaker negotiating position now than it was a few months ago. We've seen this devastating wave of assassinations, the pager attack. But so far, there's nothing concrete that suggests that red line has changed for Hezbollah.
Let's just talk about what's been happening on the ground in Lebanon. The historical site of Baalbek has been very much in the headlines. A lot of people wondering, why is that particular region in the sights of Israel? What are people saying about that?
I mean, it's interesting, everything that's happened in Baalbek. Of course, it's an ancient historical site, but it's also, one of the biggest cities in Lebanon. That eastern region, it really is the kind of jewel in the Bekaa Valley. Now, the Bekaa Valley has this long border with Syria, and it's really a key territory for Hezbollah in terms of bringing in weapons and support from Syria. It could be seen as the sort of territory within Lebanon which connects the axis of resistance, if you like, and control and free movement in the Bekaa Valley, in which Baalbek sits, is essential to Hezbollah's ability to resupply, to act in Syria, to act in Iran, to bring in, whether it's personnel, whatever, all the way from Iran. So this is a key territory. It's not in the south. It's not on the border with Israel. But Baalbek is central to Hezbollah's operations, not just on the battlefield, but in controlling Lebanon. And I think if you listen to what, international diplomats are saying, whether it's the Americans, the French, the Israeli focus now on Baalbek and the Bekaa Valley is about stopping Hezbollah's supply, so that if this war was to stop tomorrow or in a week or in 3 months' time, Hezbollah won't be able to reconstitute itself in the coming months, years, to essentially rebuild all the damage that's been done by Israel. So it's not on the front lines, it's not on the border with Israel, but it's very, very important to Hezbollah's strength.
Indeed, and it's also extremely close to Syria, about like just 20 or 30 kilometers away from Syria. And I'm just wondering if people think that's significant in this equation, as you say, in terms of restocking Hezbollah's supplies.
That is the purpose. The utility of Baalbek and the Bekaa Valley is to Hezbollah being resupplied. And without that area, without control of Baalbek, they're isolated in southern Lebanon. They become a far easier target for Israel. I think it's also important because it demonstrates an expanding and a widening of Israel's campaign. These evacuation orders which came out, from the IDF's Arabic spokesperson in the last few days. That's the first time that the IDF has ordered the evacuation of a whole city in Lebanon. So that's unprecedented, in this war that we've seen unfolding over the last 2 or 3 months. And a lot of displaced people had gone there. This is not just a military site. There's hundreds of thousands of people live in Baalbek. Some men and some of them have already been displaced. So they're looking at displacement a second, a third, even a fourth time.
Just tell us, Gareth, what's okay? Well, actually, we're gonna end it there. In fact, thank you very much indeed to the Economist Middle East correspondent Gareth Browne in Beirut. Thank you so much. Now to some weather-related news. At least 158 people have been killed in Spain as a result of what's been described as the deadliest flooding in the country's modern history. Torrential rain has devastated the eastern region of Valencia, sweeping away bridges and buildings. Well, local authorities are urging residents to stay home for their safety. Well, the Spanish authorities have published images showing the scale of the damage. The images show vehicles lying along a motorway in the province of Valencia in the aftermath of those floods. Well, people are being advised to avoid travelling to the area as many roads have not been cleared for traffic. Some business news stories we're following for you now. Moscow has described as pragmatic a decision by the United States to extend licenses for Russian banks participating in energy transactions. This excludes such transactions from what was a long list of sanctions. Still reeling from the news of the latest budget, the British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves says that she has had to make some, quote, difficult decisions. Some praise the budget for investment in public services, but others are worried about the consequences of higher borrowing and taxes, especially those impacting businesses. Well, the UK's 10-year borrowing rate reached its highest level since 2023 on fears of a resurgence in inflation. Let's get a reminder of our top stories here on Al Arabiya News. Only 5 days to go until the presidential election, and both candidates are heading west. Kamala Harris to Las Vegas for a rally alongside Jennifer Lopez. Donald Trump heading to Arizona for an interview with Tucker Carlson. There's been catastrophic flooding in Spain, which has claimed the lives of at least 158 people. Well, the country's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is urging people to stay home during the rescue efforts. And the Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati says that Israel and Hezbollah could be set to agree on a ceasefire within the coming days. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is special interviews, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join me for Global News Today, a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.